You know, there's this thing about war heroes that most people don't really get. We've got this image in our heads, stoic men in uniform, medals gleaming, standing at attention. But here's the thing. Some of the most dangerous people the Nazis ever faced weren't the ones you'd expect. One of them wore lipstick to interrogations and could drink hardened soldiers under the table. She became so slippery that the Gestapo put 5 million francs on her head. They called her the White Mouse. Her name was Nancy Wake. Born on a gusty August day in 1912 in Wellington, New Zealand, she'd go on to become the Allies' most decorated servicewoman. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's start at the beginning, because Nancy's early life, it was about as far from glamorous as you can get. When Nancy was just 20 months old, her family packed up and moved to North Sydney, Australia. 6 kids in total, and Nancy was the youngest of them all. Her father, Charles, was a journalist with easy charm and good looks. But here's where things get rough. Not long after they settled in Sydney, Charles decided family life wasn't for him. He headed back to New Zealand, supposedly to make a documentary about the Maori people. Never came back. Just left Nancy's mother Ella to raise 6 children on her own. Money was tight, really tight. Nancy grew up watching her mother struggle to keep food on the table, and you can imagine what that does to a kid, right? Makes you hungry for something more. Makes you restless. By the time Nancy hit 16, she'd had enough of the poverty and the constraints of polite Sydney society. So she did what any self-respecting rebel would do. She ran away from home, just packed up and left, determined to make her own way in the world. She found work as a nurse at first, moving around different parts of Australia. Then, something incredible happened. An aunt left her £200 in her roo. Now, in 1928, that was serious money. Most people would have saved it, been sensible about it. Not Nancy. She took that inheritance and bought herself a ticket to freedom. First stop, New York. Then London. Then Paris. She was chasing something bigger than the life she'd been born into. In London, she enrolled in journalism school. And you know what? She was good at it. Really good. By the early 1930s, she'd landed a freelance correspondent gig with the Hearst newspaper empire. Paris became her home, and she was living the life she'd always dreamed of. Parties, culture, independence. Everything her childhood hadn't been. She was finally free. But then, in 1933, she got an assignment that would change everything. She was sent to Vienna to cover the rise of this guy named Adolf Hitler. What she saw there shook her to her core. She witnessed Nazi gangs roaming the streets, beating Jewish people. She saw Jews chained to massive wheels, being whipped by stormtroopers. In one interview, she described seeing them tied to a big wheel with Nazi troops whipping them as they rolled through Vienna streets. The images haunted her. Nancy later said something that tells you everything you need to know about who she was. She said her hatred of the Nazis was very, very deep. If the opportunity arose, she'd do everything possible to stop the Nazi movement, and she meant it. That moment in Vienna planted something in her, a determination, a fury. Back in Paris, Nancy's life took another turn. In 1937, she met Henri Fiocca at a party. He was wealthy, charming, 14 years older than her. A French industrialist with money to burn. They fell hard for each other. By November 30th, 1939, they were married at the height of European tensions. Nancy became Madame Fiocca, living the high life in Marseille. Big apartment, expensive furniture, all the champagne you could drink. She'd gone from poverty in Sydney to French high society. But remember that hatred of the Nazis she'd developed in Vienna? Well, it was about to become very, very relevant indeed. In May 1940, Germany invaded France. The country Nancy had come to love, the life she'd built with Henri, all of it was suddenly under threat. This is where a lot of people would have run. Henri's money could have bought them safe passage to America or Britain. They could have sat out the war somewhere comfortable. Nancy stayed. When France fell and the country was divided between German occupation and Vichy France, Nancy and Henri both knew what they had to do. They joined the resistance. At first, Nancy worked as an ambulance driver, using a vehicle Henri had purchased. But that wasn't enough for her. Not nearly enough. Through a chance encounter with a British officer at the Hôtel du Louvre in Marseille, Nancy got connected to an escape network. It started with Captain Ian Garrow. By December 1940, the operation was up and running. Nancy's apartment hosted 15 Allied evaders, escapers, and fugitives for Christmas dinner that year. Can you imagine the risk? The network eventually became known as the Pat O'Leary line, named after Albert Garis, who used that alias. The mission was simple but deadly dangerous: get Allied soldiers out. Nancy became a key courier, traveling throughout southern France. She'd deliver her parcels, that's what they called the evaders, from Nice, Nîmes, Toulon, and Cannes to the Pyrenees border. She also delivered civilian clothing, false documents, and money. Henri provided crucial funds for the operation. They were using their wealth and privilege to save lives. Nancy's fluent French and her status as a wealthy industrialist's wife gave her cover. She could travel relatively freely, passing through checkpoints with a wink and a smile. She later described her tactics: a little powder, a little drink on the way, and she'd pass German posts. She'd wink and say, "Do you want to search me?" God, what a flirtatious little bastard she was, she later admitted. But it worked. Over 2.5 years, Nancy helped around 1,000 Allied soldiers escape to Seine. The Gestapo knew something was happening. They tapped her telephone. They intercepted her mail. They watched her apartment. But they couldn't catch her. She was too clever, too quick. They started calling her the White Mouse because of her ability to slip through their fingers. By 1943, she was number 1 on their most wanted list. 5 million francs for her capture. That's about $200,000 in today's money. Dead or alive, they wanted her that badly. When Ian Garrow was arrested, it was Nancy who organized his escape from prison. She was fearless, operating right under the Gestapo's nose day after day. But inevitably, living such a dangerous lifestyle, she was eventually arrested. The French milice, Vichy's pro-Nazi police, grabbed her and interrogated her for 4 days straight. They beat her, they tortured her, but Nancy kept to her cover story and betrayed no one. Not a single name passed her lips despite the brutality. Then something remarkable happened. Pat O'Leary himself stormed into the prison, using a fake ID card claiming he was senior French milice. He demanded to see the commissaire. He explained that Nancy was his mistress and he was her lover. It was a massive risk, but it worked. They released her into his custody. But by late 1942, things were getting worse. The Germans had occupied all of Vichy France after Operation Torch. There was nowhere safe anymore. The Pat O'Leary line had been infiltrated by traitors. People Nancy trusted were being arrested left and right. The net was closing in around everyone involved. Nancy knew she had to run, leaving Henri behind to continue their work. Can you imagine that conversation? Saying goodbye, not knowing if you'd ever see each other again. In early 1943, Nancy fled. She tried to escape France 6 times before she finally succeeded. On one attempt, she was arrested in Toulouse with a whole trainload of people. But luck was with her again. Albert Garis managed to get her released by claiming she was trying to conceal an affair. It was a clever lie that played on social expectations. Finally, she made it across the Pyrenees to Spain. It took 47 hours of brutal climbing through mountain passes. She was safe. She'd escaped the wet mouse hunters. By June 1943, Nancy had reached England. She was restless, grieving without knowing why, desperate to get back into the fight against the Nazis. She approached the British Secret Intelligence Service, but they viewed her with suspicion because she'd spoken to the Free French. Then someone suggested a different option. Maurice Buckmaster led the F section of the Special Operations Executive. The SOE was Churchill's secret army, designed to set Europe ablaze with sabotage and subversion. Nancy was impressed by Buckmaster and joined up immediately. She was given the code name Hélène and began one of the most intense training programs in the war. The SOE trainers put her through hell. Weapons training, explosives, silent killing, radio operations, night parachuting, fieldcraft. She learned to kill a man with her bare hands. Her training reports are fascinating. They noted she was a very good and fast shot who put the men to shame by her cheerful spirit and strength of character. Vera Atkins, who worked in the SOE's French section, remembered her as a real Australian bombshell. Tremendous vitality, flashing eyes. Everything she did well. But there were some hiccups. One report noted she was drunk on arrival at Welbeck, before Group A party went to station, and was temporarily withdrawn from training. Captain Ian Garrow, her old Patline leader, wrote a reference for her. He stuck up for her after the drinking incident, vouching for her suitability for confidential work. The assessment described her as having good average intelligence and plenty of common sense, a good mixer with a cheerful and persuasive personality. It noted she was attracted by adventure and excitement, and sometimes appeared to lack a proper sense of seriousness. But it also called her essentially loyal and reliable. Early 1944, Nancy was ready. Trained, armed, and angrier than ever. She was going back to France to make the Nazis pay for what they'd done. On the night of April 29th to 30th, 1944, Nancy parachuted into the Auvergne region as part of a 3-person team called Freelance. The team leader was John Farmer, codenamed Hubert. Dennis Rake was their radio operator. Their mission was to arm and organize the Maquis, French guerrilla fighters, for D-Day. Nancy's parachute got tangled in a tree on landing. Henri Tardivat, the local Maquis leader, found her dangling there in the branches like an ornament. He remarked, with typical French gallantry, "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Nancy's response, "Don't give me that French shit." She cut herself free and got to work immediately. The relationship with the main Maquis leader, Émile Coulaudon, codenamed Gaspard, started off frosty. He wanted money and arms but wasn't cooperative. It took orders from the French forces of the interior in London to make him play ball. Once that happened, the SOE began sending massive amounts of arms and equipment. Nancy's job was to coordinate these drops, collect the parachuted supplies, and distribute them among the various Maquis groups. It was incredibly dangerous, incredibly complex work. She was organizing drops that came nearly every other night. Guns, ammunition, explosives, money. Everything the resistance needed to fight back. And she managed every detail of it. Nancy also became a recruiter and trainer, helping build the Maquis into a real fighting force. By June, they had roughly 7,500 fighters under their command. But the Germans weren't sitting idle. On June 2nd, they launched a probing attack on Coulaudon's base at Montmouchet. It was a warning of what was coming. On June 10th, the Germans came back with a much larger force. Then, on June 20th, they encircled the Maquis positions and forced a retreat with heavy casualties. It was a defeat, no question about it. Nancy and her team retreated with the Maquis groups over 3 days, covering 150 kilometers to Saint-Santin. In the chaos of the retreat, Dennis Rake buried his radio and code books to keep them from German hands, but now they had no way to contact London. The nearest SOE radio operator was in Châteauroux, over 250 kilometers away. Someone needed to get there fast with an updated situation report for headquarters. Nancy borrowed a bicycle. She rode through German-occupied territory, passing multiple checkpoints to reach that radio operator. Then she turned around and rode all the way back. 500 kilometers in 72 hours. That's 310 miles on a bicycle, dodging German patrols with critical intelligence. It's almost impossible to comprehend the endurance that required. When she finally made it back, exhausted beyond belief, she learned that a new radio and operator had arrived while she was gone. She laughed about it later. For that bicycle ride, Nancy was awarded the George Medal by the British government. It was one of many decorations she'd eventually receive for her courage. After the bike ride, Nancy joined Henri Tardivat's Maquis group permanently. They initiated a series of attacks on German convoys and defended their camp from enemy assaults. Nancy claimed she participated in a raid that destroyed the Gestapo headquarters in Mont-Luçon, killing 38 Germans. Some historians question this, but others support the account. During a raid on a German munitions factory, an SS sentry nearly discovered their team. Nancy killed him with her bare hands before he could raise the alarm. She later explained it simply. They'd taught the judo chop technique at SOE training. She'd practiced it. This was the only time she actually used it. Whack, and it worked. She said she was really surprised it killed him, but she didn't lose any sleep over it. This was war, and he was the enemy. At one point, Nancy discovered her men were protecting a young woman they'd captured. They suspected she was a German spy, but didn't have the heart to execute her. Nancy had no such hesitation. She interrogated the woman, confirmed she was an informer, and ordered her execution. She later said she never regretted it. Not once. It was war, and traitors got people killed. She did what needed to be done without flinching. From April 1944 until August, Nancy's 7,000 Maquis fighters battled 22,000 German SS troops in the region. The numbers were heavily against them. But the Maquis caused 1,400 German casualties, while suffering only about 100 of their own. They were a thorn in the German side, disrupting everything they did. On August 15th, American forces invaded southern France. The resistance groups harried the retreating Germans, making their withdrawal as costly and difficult as possible. During this fighting, Henri Tardivat was badly wounded and lost a leg to amputation. It was a devastating blow to Nancy. Tardivat had become a close friend. Then came the news that shattered her completely. During a victory celebration in Vichy, Nancy ran into a woman she knew from Marseille. The woman asked about Henri. Nancy said she was returning to Marseille to be with her husband. The woman's face went pale. "Oh no, Nancy. Don't you know? He's dead." It took time to get the full story. Henri had been arrested not long after Nancy escaped. The Gestapo had approached his parents, using his torture as leverage. If someone gave up Nancy's location, it said, Henri would be released. It was a lie, of course. They would have killed him anyway, but Henri's family blamed Nancy. Henri endured months of brutal torture. They broke his body trying to break his spirit. But he never gave up Nancy's location. He never betrayed the cause they'd fought for. In October 1943, when the Gestapo realized they'd get nothing from him, they executed him. Nancy had been safe in England while her husband was dying. They said nothing was part of the introduction to it. The guilt crushed her. She blamed herself for his death, even though there was nothing she could have done. He'd stayed behind by choice, knowing the risks. Nancy later said she'd carry that guilt for the rest of her life. The man who'd loved her, supported the resistance, died because of his loyalty to her. In mid-September 1944, with their mission complete, Nancy and the freelance team returned to Great Britain. The war in France was effectively won. Her work was done. Immediately after the war ended, the medals started piling up. The George Medal from the United Kingdom, the Medal of Freedom from the United States, the Médaille de la Résistance from France. She received the Croix de Guerre 3 times, an almost unprecedented honor. Later, she'd be made a Knight of the Légion d'honneur, then promoted to officer. Nancy Wake was the most decorated servicewoman of World War II. No Allied woman received more honors for bravery. The girl from North Sydney had become a legend. But peacetime didn't suit Nancy. She worked briefly for the Air Ministry Intelligence Department, attached to embassies in Paris and Prague. She wrote survival manuals and debriefed POWs. She decided to try politics. In 1949, she ran as a Liberal Party candidate for the Sydney seat of Barton against Herbert Evatt, the Deputy Prime Minister. Mansi achieved a 13% swing against Evatt, impressive for a newcomer. But Evatt retained the seat with 53.2% of the vote. She'd come close but lost. In 1951, she tried again. This time, the result was even closer. So close you could taste it. But Nancy left Australia after that second defeat and moved back to England. She just couldn't settle down. Peace was boring after everything she'd lived through. In December 1957, she married John Forward, a former RAF bomber pilot. He liked to drink, enjoyed a joke, and they were well matched for each other. They relocated to Australia in the early 1960s. In 1966, Nancy made one last attempt at politics, running for the Sydney seat of Kingsford-Smith. She lost again. In 1985, Nancy published her autobiography, The White Mouse. It became a bestseller, introducing her incredible story to a whole new generation of readers. John Forward died on August 19, 1997. After 40 years of marriage, Nancy was alone again. She was 85 years old and running out of money. To fund her retirement, Nancy sold her war medals. She commented, "There was no point in keeping them. I'll probably go to hell and they'd melt anyway." In 2001, Nancy left Australia for the last time and emigrated to London. She wanted to be among her old comrades, the people who understood what she'd lived through. She became a resident at the Stafford Hotel in St. James's Place, Piccadilly. It had been a British and American forces club during the war. She felt at home there. In 2003, after a heart attack, Nancy moved to the Royal Star and Garter Home for disabled ex-servicemen and women in Richmond, London. She lived quietly there, but even into her late 90s, she still enjoyed a drink and a party with old war mates. She was a regular at the annual Anzac Day reception. Australia had offered her medals decades earlier, but she refused them. She told the government they could stick their medals where the monkey stuck his nuts. That was Nancy. It wasn't until February 2004 that she finally accepted the Companion of the Order of Australia. By then, she figured they actually meant it. In April 2006, New Zealand awarded her their highest honour, the RSA badge in gold. She was being recognised at last by both countries she'd called home. On August 7, 2011, Nancy Wake died at Kingston Hospital after being admitted with a chest infection. She was 98 years old, 3 weeks shy of 99. She'd requested that her ashes be scattered at Montluçon in central France, where she'd fought with the Maquis. When she died, she declared she wanted her ashes scattered where she'd fought with brave men. On March 11, 2013, her ashes were finally scattered in the woods surrounding the Château de Fragneau, near Montluçon, her headquarters during the war. She was home. Nancy Wake's story is more than just a war story. It's about a woman who refused to accept the limitations society placed on her from the very beginning. She ran away from poverty. She chased her dreams across the world. She witnessed evil and decided to fight it, even when it meant risking everything she had. She became a spy, a saboteur, a killer when necessary. She led men into battle and earned their respect through sheer competence and courage. She never asked for special treatment. Henry Tardivat, her Maquis comrade, said it best. "She is the most feminine woman I know, until the fighting starts. Then, she is like 5 men." The official SOE historian said her irrepressible, infectious high spirits were a joy to everyone who worked with her. She brought light into the darkest of times. By the time Nancy died in 2011, she'd lived almost a century. She'd seen the world transform from the age of telegrams to the internet era. She'd outlived most of her comrades, most of the people who understood what they'd all been through together. But she never forgot them, and she never stopped telling their stories. Nancy Wake was many things. A runaway, a journalist, a socialite, a wife, a spy, a soldier, a killer, a hero. The White Mouse, the Gestapo's most wanted. But maybe most importantly, she was a woman who decided that standing by and watching evil triumph wasn't an option. She chose to fight. And she fought until the war was won. Remember the woman who parachuted into occupied France at 31 years old and proceeded to make life absolutely hellish for the Nazis? Remember the White Mouse.